things that I never learned before. And a lot of the things that I was noticing about myself was compromising in areas that I knew I shouldn't have compromised, whether it was watching television Sabbath morning, whether, whatever it is. I've noticed that that's kind of the beginning of my compromising, watching movies, listening to music, things that I know I shouldn't have done. And unfortunately, when I was 15, I got in an altercation, and that was the first time that I got arrested as a juvenile. And that was kind of the beginning of this consistent pattern all throughout my life that just wanted to be this rebellious teenager. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to be held accountable for anything I did do. And so, unfortunately, once I turned 18, at this point, I was already smoking, I was drinking, I was going to clubs, I was doing all of the things that the world will tell you you must do in order for you to enjoy life and experience it to its fullest. And I got a taste of it. And I tell young people this all the time. So often we look at the world as a very dark and evil place, but in reality, it's not the case. That's what it was for me when I grew up. That's what they told me when I went into the world. Actually, it was a place that I had a lot of fun and I had a lot of memories, right? The issue is that once you start looking for the things of the world to fulfill the things of your heart, they don't last as long. And I didn't know that. And it took me about 6, 7, 8 years to figure out that it didn't matter how much partying I did, how much drinking I did, how much smoking I did, how much memories I was creating. At the end of the day, those things were not fulfilling me. When I turned 18, obviously the big step is to go to college. And so I went to college, and my pursuit to be a basketball player began. And unfortunately, I never caught the break that I wanted that I was looking for. But at the end of the day, I was trying to achieve the goal of being a basketball player because of what it can bring me. It can bring me fame. It can bring me fortune. It can bring me allow myself to be recognized to those who I come in contact with. And that was kind of my pursuit for about 2 or 3 years. And as I mentioned, this is when I got introduced to this lifestyle that I never seen before. Again, when I was 15, 16 years old, is the first time I went into a teenage club and I got a taste of it. And now that I'm 18, 19, 20 years old, I was going to these type of environments on a consistent basis. And it's safe to say that at this point in my life, I had no relationship with God. I knew that the Sabbath was important. Even when I worked in secular jobs, I would drink, smoke, party, curse, it doesn't matter, but I would not work on the Sabbath because that's the Lord's day, right? So that one thing I knew that I should not do. And I remember working on the Sabbath one time and I just felt guilty about it, but yet I didn't feel guilty about anything else that I did. And so I always saw these little glimpses that Jesus would intervene to remind me, right? Though I'm away from the home, doesn't mean that I'm away from him, that he had his constant eye on me throughout my life. And so when I turned 18, I went to college. I was endeavoring in these things much more. I had the opportunity to move from Orlando over to another city about 2 hours away from where I grew up. And from there, that's where the experience maximized. Not only was I going to clubs, now I'm getting to know all of these famous people, and I worked 5 days up the week. I was working 2 jobs, going to school full time, but partying on the weekends. And this is when I got introduced not only to doing drugs, but now I'm introduced to selling drugs. And I can honestly tell you, at this point, I didn't have a conscience. I remember one story in particular that I had all of this money, and one of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to buy a big body car. That's what they call it down here in the States. And big Crown Victoria. I wanted to get big rims on it with the sound system and just, make myself feel like if you have this type of car, then you're known and well respected. And I remember going back at home, buying this car, and not even a few miles after purchasing and driving it, the motor blew. And I was like, oh, this is great. Well, I remember calling the tow truck company, and they towed my car from from my hometown where I bought it, and I was going to ship it, tow it over to the city that I just moved to. Well, before I did this, my friend, I take this back. Before the tow truck, my apologies. Let me backtrack. Before I did this, my friend told me, hey, listen, if you're going to go back at home, I want you to basically transport these drugs over to the house so that way we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm like, okay, not a problem. So as I'm driving, that's when the motor blew. And that's when I decided to give a call to the tow truck company so they can tow my car back home. And that car was not registered. The car had no insurance. The car looked very suspicious as an old police officer car that had all of the stickers removed. So, it just, I was bringing a lot of unnecessary attention driving this car for all the wrong reasons. And I remember as my motor blew and I had to pull over to the side of the highway, that police officer came and something told me to get out of the car and kind of sit on the trunk of the car. And as I was sitting on the trunk of the car, a police officer pulled over and he said, "Is everything okay?" Now, mind you, the tag that I had was not the tag for that vehicle. It was another vehicle. I had no insurance, no registration for the car. And I remember telling the police officer, "Yeah, motor blew. I'm just waiting for a tow truck." Now, in my experience growing up, police officers just don't simply ask if you're okay and then they leave. They typically ask a little bit more questions: license, registration, where are you going, what are you doing, can I search the vehicle? That has been my experience all my life. And I remember thinking to myself that if this police officer asked for my license and registration, it's not going to look good for me. And typically, if he searches a vehicle, he's going to see that there's drugs in the car. So I have drugs in an unregistered car that is non-licensed and not insured. Police officer said, "Oh, okay, you have a great day," and he pulls off. Now, at that moment, I didn't think much of it. Fast forwarding years later, right? You're thinking to myself, like, if that police officer would have simply asked for one of those two things, I don't think I would be with you in the Zoom meeting speaking to you. But I could tell you that my conscience was I wasn't afraid. My heart wasn't racing. I knew at that point in my life, I was so far away from God that my conscience, the things that used to bother me before, did not bother me. There was one situation when I was going to a party that I got into a major fight, and the gentleman who I got in a fight with, the young lady that I was with, they decided to make an example out of her, and unfortunately she got a lot of severe injuries, was placed in the hospital, broken ribs, bone fractures in the face, and before all of this happened, I remember getting kicked out of the club, and because they couldn't get a hand on me, they ended up making an example of this young lady. And I remember during this time, it was more of, what am I doing with my life? Why am I putting myself in in these situations where I grew up in an Adventist home? I grew up knowing what was right and what was wrong. Yet here I am partying, here I am drinking, here I am selling drugs, here I am, doing all of these things that I knew wasn't right. And that, when that fight broke out and I saw what they did to this young lady, that was kind of an awakening. I was like, I need to leave from where I just moved to and move back home. And I don't know how many of you have done this in the past, but we kind of, well, Lord, I'm going to change. But we make these modifications. We don't necessarily change. Instead of doing this bad thing, instead of watching rated R movies, I'm just going to watch PG-13 movies, right? And this is where instead of eating this pork, I'm just going to eat this. And we kind of do this checklist. Well, I'm not as bad, and I'm just going to do these things, but it's not going to be as bad as it once were. And so for me, I kind of calmed down a lot with the fighting, a lot with the partying, a lot with the drinking. And so I found my way in involving myself a lot with alcohol and going to the bars. And my goal was to try to make money. And during this time, everything that I had inspired to do, the goals that I was achieving, the money that I was making, everything seemed to be falling apart in my life. And it didn't matter how much I tried. I took 2 steps forward and I'll get punched back 3 steps backwards, right? And I think the Lord was really doing all of these things to really bring to my attention that the things of this world are short-lived. They don't give you lasting satisfaction. And I remember one night as I moved back home, old habits die hard. And I remember one night we was going to go out that night, and a friend of mine just purchased a new vehicle, and he just purchased a pistol as well, a gun. And we was in front of an apartment complex, and he was kind of shooting it up in the air. And I remember very specifically that this club that we're going to go to, we got to make sure that we're not involving ourselves in any shape, in any trouble. We don't know the people. We don't know the owners. We don't know we don't know anybody. So we agreed. To make a long story short, we went into the club. We were having a good night. So a friend of mine was talking to another young lady, and they knew each other from the neighborhood they used to live at. And lo and behold, the boyfriend shows up to the conversation, and the girl did a 180 and did this whole, I don't know him, he's been harassing me. my friend was kind of, what? Like, we know each other. She's like, no, you really been bothering me. And so the boyfriend got upset. One story led to another. What ended up being a one-on-one fight ended up being 5 on 60 people. And I was one of the 5, right? And I just remember so vividly how angry I was because my friends needed my help and there was nothing that I can do at that moment. And I remember that we placed the gun in the back of the trunk of that car. And I said, I'm just going to grab the gun and whatever happens, happens. That was just my mentality. I'm going to fix it the way that I know how to fix it. And I remember going to my friend that we pulled him off, from the guy that he was fighting. We pulled him off and I was like, where's the keys to the car? Where's the keys to the car? Now, the old school Cadillacs have 2 keys, one to the trunk and then one to start the vehicle. And if you lost the trunk keys, then you needed to get the vehicle to the car. And then there was a button that you press from the glove department and it'd pop up the trunk. Anyway, that's how they built the cars back in the day. So I remember couldn't find the keys to the car. And the only thing that I did find was a key to the trunk. And I was like, oh, great. So I went to the key to the trunk. And when I went to the trunk of the car, the gun that we placed there wasn't there, or at least I couldn't find it. I couldn't see it. And I don't know what came over me, but I knew that if I had that gun in my hand, I was going to do something that I knew I was going to regret for the rest of my life. And to this day of me, again, I'll go back to the point that I was making before, that there's moments in my life where I just saw God intervene and I didn't realize it was God intervening. And these were one of those moments where I left the house. We knew the gun was there. We knew where we placed it and it wasn't there. And then after the night was over, we found the other key. So it wasn't like somebody else had the key. We found both keys, yet we couldn't find the gun. It's countless stories like this where I was getting behind the car, behind the car, the vehicle, drunk completely. And I'm driving and I don't remember getting home that night. Police officers pulling me over with alcohol in my breath. And I know that I was being arrested or that I was driving under the influence. And lo and behold, they get an emergency call and they had to leave. And I was able to escape that situation. All of these little things where if it went full on, my life would be completely, the trajectory of my life would be completely different. And so, this is kind of the lifestyle that I was living. This is kind of the patterns that I was developing. And I made a decision to kind of slow things down. I was at this point working as a fitness instructor, and every story, right, has a testimony with a young lady breaking someone's heart. And so anyway, I remember meeting this young lady, beautiful young lady, and she was a part of the class that I was taking. And I got a liking to her. She had a liking to me. And for the first time, I was seeing life far greater than the life that I was living, kind of settling down, finding a job, being, more disciplined, right? The young lady I was talking to was very, she was non-Adventist, but she was very attractive girl, had her head on her shoulders, very reserved. And so I was, vicariously changing because of her. And, even in my, this girl didn't curse, she didn't drink, she didn't go to clubs, but here I am doing all of those things, but yet I'm witnessing to her about the Sabbath, and she needs to learn about the 7th-day Sabbath. And anyway, I was butchering that witness, obviously. To make a long story short, things didn't work out, and I was left heartbroken. I was left, wondering, what is the meaning of life, right? The old saying goes, is it better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all? Like, I'd rather have not loved at all than to have loved and lost, because it sucks. I'm sorry. It hurt. Like, I've seen friends who was shot and killed because of their lifestyle. I've seen so many tragic events, and nothing could compare to that heartbreak that I was experiencing. But that heartbreak really led me into this transition where I remember getting a phone call from my sister. But during this time, I was living with a bunch of my friends, and everything that could go wrong was going wrong. I mean, eviction notices, gas being cut off, light being cut off. I never found peace in the place that I was residing. The only place I did find peace was when I visited my sister and my brother-in-law on my sister and her husband, when I visit them on the Sabbath. And I remember just going to the house and just being at peace. And they had a godly home. They did family worship. And it was just such a different environment from where I was at, that it was this constant anxiety, this constant stress that I was under. And I remember getting a phone call from my sister and asking, "Hey, Loami, you've been sponsored to go to a youth conference." Now, I was like, "Yeah, I don't know about this youth. What is it about?" So she's telling me the youth conference was Generation Youth for Christ, GYC. And she was telling me, "Yeah, you got sponsored. It'll be a great, event. I think it'll be beneficial for you. And I think you would really make the person happy if you go, because they really thought about you as they sponsored." And I was like, I guess I have nothing else to lose. I'd rather start the new year with God and not with a hangover, as I always do. So why not?" And at that point, I was kind of in the midst of traveling. I like to travel to various cities. And so I was like, "Yeah, all right, I'll consider it." And so I remember, that time was coming up, and I remember I was going to go to this to this youth conference, and everyone was meeting at my sister's church, and they had two buses that they was going to travel from Florida over to Kentucky, and so there was a lot of churches that partnered together and put their money together to rent these two buses. And I remember walking. I was about 25 years old, 26, and I remember going, and there was all these 13, 14-year-old kids. I'm thinking to myself, what kind of conference is, I'm not good. No way. Like, no, I'm not going home. And I remember my good friend who I ended up marrying, his little nephew was going. He's like, "Oh, you're going to this youth conference, man?" He's like, "Yeah, I heard it's for little kids, and you're going to be the only adult there." And I was like, yeah, this is not for me. And so I remember grabbing my bag, and I was going to get in my car and drive back home and tell my sister, "Hey, I'm not going to go. This ain't, this is not the vibe that I was anticipating." And I remember bumping into one of my close friends, Maurice, who we grew up in the church together. We played in basketball leagues together. And even when we did all, our group of friends that kind of went out and drifted out away from the church, he was the one constant friend who always hung out with us, but didn't do the things that we did, or he did know the things that we did, but he never judged us for it. But he was just a constant positive presence, and he just enjoyed us for us. And it was one of those genuine Christian friendships where it wasn't judgmental. He never was preachy. He always chose an alternative, a positive alternative to what we wanted to do. And it was amazing how he did that. But anyway, I remember bumping. I haven't seen him in years. And I was like, "What's going on, man?" He was like, "Yo, you're going to this conference?" I was like, "Yeah, I think so. I don't know." He's like, "Man, I don't think you know what you're getting yourself into." I was like, "Man, but I hear it's just like this little kids conference." He's like, "No, man, this is actually, it's a conference for adults like our age. And man, I just went last year, first time." And he's kind of giving me the whole, the real spill of it. And I was like, "All right." He's like, "Man, I think you should go, man. I think it's going to be something that is really going to change your life." I was like, "All right, why not?" Like I said, I already committed. I'm going to go. And I remember getting on this bus, and it was about a 16-hour trip. I just had all these questions. I had all of these, kind of reflecting on life. I'm kind of thinking about, okay, what is the trajectory that I want my life to go to? And what is it that I really want to accomplish? And I grew up in this faith, but I didn't really practice. I wasn't really practicing it the way that I knew I should have. And I remember getting off that bus and getting off, and I'm seeing thousands and thousands of young people. And they were weird. They were just all weird. They were all different, I'm with the big heavy jacket. I'm with as you can see, all the hats that I have back here. I love hats. So I'm wearing my hats. I'm just me, and all of these long dresses, and Maranatha, brother. God bless. Happy, I was just like, whoa, this is, all the you thousands of people are weird. I'm the normal one, right? But there was this genuine happiness, this genuine joy that they had, that I couldn't really think that they were corny or cheesy or goofy. There was something genuine about it. But I went, and I was in my I was just observing everyone. And I remember we kind of had the schedule. Early in the morning, they had one person speaking, and then they had these seminars, and then in the evening they have another speaker. And so every morning they wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Listen, I don't wake up at 8 o'clock to get to work on time. And I was waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to these early morning meetings. But there was a young man, a brother named Sebastian Braxton, who was doing the morning devotions. And I was listening to his story, and I just locked into how he was preaching, what he was preaching about. I'm listening to his story, and it seemed like he was willing to die for the message that he was preaching. And yet I wasn't willing to die for the things that I was doing. And I was like, how is it that he's willing to die for something that I grew up believing? And that's kind of what really, locked me into waking up and being motivated to listening to him preach. Young guy, my age and so forth. And so I went to the breakout meetings, and the only reason why I was going to this breakout session so I can get all of this knowledge. So when I go back home and we have my debates with my roommates, I can school them on religion and show them how the Sabbath is a Sabbath as we're drinking beer, smoking weed, and doing all the other things that Adventists don't do, right? But I was going to show you how the Sabbath is God's day of rest. So that's the only reason why I was going to these seminars, to get educated, to better witness to people so we can have debates and I can win the debates. And then the evening devotions, I listen to it as well. And so every morning we'll go, and we always try to sit in the front of, try to get good seats in the front rows because it'll get packed. And as I'm reflecting, I remember it was Friday night, and right before Sabbath, everyone, Adventists, we rush to do everything right before. So everyone's getting their food, everyone's getting the final prep, things ready for the Sabbath. And so I remember staying in line, and I was ordering my turkey panini sandwich. This is before God, before I became a new creature, and now I don't eat those things anymore, right? But I remember my sister early on, she's like, you need to stop hanging out with me and go make some new friends. I was like, Jesus, I love you too, sis. So now I'm alone, walking around with thousands of people I don't know. And I was sitting there in line, and I saw this young lady from the corner of my eye, very beautiful girl. And fellas, you can understand, you can relate to it somehow. In your mind, you know what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, how she's going to respond. She's going to, what I'm saying? Like, it's all played out in your mind, and you're going to execute. So in my mind, she had a box of pizza, and we didn't have microwaves in the hotel rooms. These $400 a night rooms, no microwaves. So that was my pitch. It's like, you would think, right, that we're paying $400 a night, they will have a microwave to heat up pizza. That was my pitch. She would laugh, and then I go in. Nothing that I put in my mind went as like, you would think, right? And she's like, what? I was like, yeah, pizza. And anyway, I butchered whatever I thought in my mind I was going to do, completely butchered it. And anyway, we did have a conversation, and it was so refreshing to be able to talk to her that she was sharing her testimony, and she was kind of in the same thing that I was doing. I was partying, I was clubbing, I was doing all these things, and I came to this conference last year, changed my life. And so, she was such a breath of fresh air that she was so different from all the other people that I was meeting. Because every time you meet my fellow Adventists, it was just like, brother, that God and the Adventist lingo that we use, the cliche, Maranatha, 1844, and I'm like, Sister White, the prophetess, I'm like, this is all weird, but she was able to talk to me the way that I understood, I normally talk to people and share her story. And it was just good to hear, right? Somebody experience what I was desiring deep in my heart. And so if you ever been in these kind of conferences or any type of setting, once you meet somebody or you bump into somebody, you bump into them every single time thereafter. And so I remember the next day, saw her at breakfast, hello. And then the Sabbath morning, Mark Finley was going to preach. And I lost my brother-in-law, and I lost my sister, but I was like, I'm going to get good seats. And I saw her from a distance. Now, of course, this is, my smooth ways. She was sitting maybe the fourth row, fifth seat over. I was going to sit maybe the third row, fifth row over, and kind of do one of those looking for somebody, and then hopefully I get a glance and she'll invite me to sit down. I play a lot of things in my mind how it's going to work out, and it just never works out the way that I want it to work out. And so I did. I found the right seating. I was executing, and I turned around, she was gone. I was like, oh, great. But I didn't want to leave because everyone was grabbing seats. So I stayed there. Now I'm going to fast forward to the following year because, right, I've been going to GYC ever since this conversion experience. And I remember going to Mark Finley's seminar. Now I want to make sure that from what I understood, and I'm pretty sure this is what he says he does before he preaches. He says that before he preaches, he goes to the stage and he prays and he asks God, to direct him in where he should focus his attention. So if you ever see Mark Finley preach, he's very strategic onto where he's looking. and he kind of does a little robot thing and he points. I don't know if you really study Mark Finley's style of preaching, but he says that as he's praying, the Spirit would tell him, there's a young couple over here, there's a person over here, and I want you to really focus your attention in these areas. So backtracking, I'm sitting here and I have all of these questions, and he's preaching the sermon about Daniel and the Hebrew boys, and out of the thousands of out of the millions of out of all the millions of people, God has called you. And he kind of looked at me, or I felt like he was looking at me. And every question that I asked, he would look at me and point at me, and he would answer my question that I had in my mind. And it was like he was only preaching to me. And I remember for the first time in my life, I felt the great controversy being played out in my heart, like this great tug where I'm feeling my heart being pulled in two directions. And if you ever watch those cartoons, when you grow up, the little angel and the little devil, right? And it's like, you should do this. No, you should do this, right? And then that's what I was experiencing. I was listening. God says, surrender your heart. Why would he surrender it? You have all of these goals and plans. I'm getting text messages and calls. Happy New Year. Where are you at? We're at this party. I'm getting another text message like, yo, this TV show that you want to be on, they want you to be on the show. And it's like, I was literally battling between two deities and wondering, do I surrender my heart to God, or do I give in and go back to what I know that I experienced? And I was wrestling. And I remember he made an appeal, and he was calling all of the workers and secretary, the workers of the church to come. And I just remember looking up, and there was this group of people, and then all of a sudden it splits. I see my sister, and then the group closes. And I just remember breaking down and crying, because I remember all of the times my sister was praying for me, my mother, how they just wanted me to be saved. And my mother used to pray these radical prayers like, Lord, break his legs if you have to. If that's what, hey, mom, don't be praying. I need my legs to play basketball, right? Don't, so I used to have these prayers with God. Don't listen to my mother. She's crazy. Give me, my legs that I need, So anyway, that was kind of the dynamics between the relationship between my mother and father, and my mother and myself in our relationship. But I remember just crying and this constant voice saying, just surrender your heart. Just surrender your heart. And, I was crying. Two ladies next to me, they prayed for me. And I remember just this overwhelming feeling of God speaking to me in a way that I've never heard him speak before. And I remember going to Sebastian that morning, the last day. And I told him I was so afraid to go back home, because I know what home consists of. And I know what I experienced here was so real that I don't want this moment to pass. And I remember going back home, and I was still working as a fitness instructor. And I tell you again, there's these compromises. Well, I won't listen to this music. I'll just listen to this. I won't drink to get drunk. I'll just drink to socialize. And I did this for a few months, and God says it's either all or nothing. And I was like, I always revert back to that moment. And I know that experience was so real that I couldn't ignore it. And I told the Lord, like, Lord, if this is what you want from me, then you got to make it clear and open up the doors. And so Providence happened, and I was able to go to a Bible college. A lot of my clients even sponsored, myself to go to this Bible college, sort of like Arise. They had one here in Florida during the time. And lo and behold, I went there for 4 months, and all of the friends that I lost, right, I gained it back in this 4-month setting where this group of people, we were just in this bubble, learning about our faith, learning about Christ. And I saw how God was restoring these broken pieces in my life. And I remember this conversation with my friend while I was there. And I remember talking on the phone. He was like, man, what's good, man? How's everything going? I was like, I'm doing all right. He's like, man, so tell me about your experience. And we have a tendency as Christians, specifically Adventists, we like to preach to people. We don't like to talk to them. And so I'm preaching to him. I'm like, brother, I just know that, when I accepted Christ, he's like, bro, you're preaching to me. Like, we drank together, we partied together, we did business together. Like, talk to me. Like, you're preaching to me. You're sounding like a pastor. And I told him, I was like, to quite honest, man, I just know I had a lot of questions on that bus, on that way to GYC. And I came back with all of those questions answered. And he told me something that resonates to this very day. And he says, Loami, I respect that. And we always have our Jesus moment. All throughout my life, there's rough patches in our life where we stop doing something, we go kind of back to church, we read our Bible, and then life, goes back to normal, and then we kind of forget God again, and we just continue in this pattern of constantly, persist. And he says, we all have our Jesus moment, and for me, I knew that your story was real, like your experience was real, and our other mutual friend, he didn't think that it was real. He's like, but listen, I'm going to tell you this. He says, I'm watching you. And just know that if you ever decide to come back and do what we was doing before, we will welcome you with open arms. But at that day, your witness to God is done. And that resonates to me to this very day, because there are moments in my experience, even now, 10 years removed from this experience, that I don't feel like being a Christian anymore. I don't feel like surrendering my heart to God. I don't feel like praying. I don't feel like having my devotion. I'm being vulnerable. I'm very honest and transparent when I speak. But that voice keeps ringing that the day that you come back, your witness to God is done. My experience isn't for me anymore. It's for my friend who's watching. It's for those who don't feel like there's hope, but they only see me as the only example who's going counter everything that's happening. And yet they see falls, but I'm consistent. My walk isn't for me anymore. My walk is for them. Because at the end of the day, if I ever decide to leave and go back, they can have the opportunity to say, you don't tell me about God, because my boy went to a school, he traveled the world, he preached, he did all these things, and he's doing the same thing that I'm doing now. Your God has no power. And that is really what motivates me every morning to get up, to do my devotions, to have this experience with God, because at the end of the day, Lord, it's so tempting and easy to go back and revert to what I know instead of fighting against the grain and not doing it for myself, but for those who have seen the transformation. And I want them to know that at the end of the day, that you are real, because I know that you're real. God gave me the opportunity to travel to California. I became a Bible worker. From there, I was able to work as a Bible teacher and chaplain for various academies. And one of the greatest moments of my life was getting invited to that same conference, GYC, and to share my testimony in the very city that did all my partying, all of my drinking. And we did a massive campaign to send great controversies to everyone in that city. And there it is, before 10,000 people, thousands more watching. They saw this kid from Orlando, Florida, who did all this dirt, sharing how God transformed his life in the very city that he did all his dirt in. And that moment for me is a transcending moment, because it was far more than just me sharing my testimony. It was evidence that God saw something in me worth saving. And he wanted to see and use me to reach far more people with my story, not for anything I'd done, but simply because I bought into what he had for me. And I wish that I could tell you, oh, that was the end of the story. And that, the young lady I met, I married, and we lived happy. No, that's not the story, right? After that testimony, life got harder. The struggle became much more real. Things became much heavier. But I'm in that process. I'm finding and understanding who God is through those trials, through that experience. I've been able to travel the world, to go to Hawaii, to Canada, to Africa. I've been able to live in Christ and be able to experience it. Even to this day, like, I finished my book, praise God, right? Finished my degree, praise the Lord, right? And then I was like, Lord, I found a job, only for that job to be taken away because of a purged juvenile record of 23 years ago, right? Something that should not be held accountable. And now it's easy to say, Lord, the very thing that I used to do that transformed my life, that I shared the testimony, is not being held against me. And Lord, what am I supposed to do? He's like, do you trust me? And I'm seeing more chapters being revealed, that God is going to allow us to go through more trials. Sometimes we ask for blessings. And the more that I read, the more that I study, I see that the blessings is really the trials and the tribulations we go through. And the Christians, don't tell me about trials. I don't want that. Give me blessings, God. But I'm seeing that in my life, and my testimony has shifted over the years. Sometimes I leave at GYC and look, young people, God can know. The reality is, this is not for the faint of heart. If you want to live a real life, be a Christian. It's going to be the toughest thing you ever do because you're fighting against what you want to do and what God desires from you. And you always have to buy in to what God has for you, because it's far better plan than what you have. And even in my season right now where I'm like, Lord, I worked so hard to get to this point, now it's taken away. I feel like Joseph, like, what more can I do? I'm realizing God's goodness and mercy. And at the end of the day, I can honestly tell you, I would not trade this life for any other life. I may not have all the riches in the world. I may not have, but like, I always joked around with my friends, and I was like, I wanted to be the Prince of Orlando. And the reason why I said Prince of Orlando, because a king has a queen. And so I didn't have a queen, so I'd have to be a prince, right? Because I wasn't married. But God says, why would you want to set up for being a prince? Why don't you work for the King of Kings who owns the world? And let me use you to travel it. And so, I'm not able to travel to Australia, but here I am talking to you guys via Zoom, right? To people have across the world. And my testimony is a reflection of what God can do when we buy in to his plan for us. And so I don't share my testimony too. I think once I did GYC, I kind of shared it for a year afterwards. I'm like, you can go on YouTube and watch it. So when I was asked, I'll be honest, when I asked, I was like, I don't want to share my story. Like, I'm past removed that, right? But God, when I have the opportunity to share it, is a reminder that even through my brokenness, even through the trials, God is willing to use you and to mold you and to shape you back into what he has created you to be. And that is why, the book of Revelation tells us that it's only those who accept the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony that they become overcomers. And I know as a church at large, as an Adventist, we have this beautiful message, but so often we negate the testimony that really will inspire people to accept Christ as a personal savior. People don't want to know what you know. They want to know how much you care. What is the experience in your life? And I challenge you. I'm challenging anybody who's watching now, who may be watching later. What is the testimony that you have God currently? I go to these prayer meetings sometimes, and I'm just being very honest and transparent. You hear these testimonies of what God used to do for you. Oh, I remember when I was 17, and the person is 56 years old, and they're talking about they're 7. Like, God hasn't done nothing for you since that time. Like, what has God done for you today? What is he like? Even your trials, praise him. Like, Lord, I got no money, light bill's about to be cut off, but I'm praising him because I know he will provide. That's a testimony. That shows that God is working, and you have this, so I really inspire anybody after I share my testimony that if you truly are a new creature in Christ, it's not a one-time experience, it's a continual experience that we must have with Christ. And so it doesn't matter if you're 13 or you're 85, you have a testimony that the world needs to hear. And they don't want to hear about what you used to do or what God has done. They want to know, what is God doing for you currently? And so that is my story. Hopefully you guys have been blessed, and through it all, my mother was able to see me. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, my mother was the sponsor for me for GYC. And she knew that if I knew it was her, I wouldn't have went. And so my testimony is to those mothers who have children outside of the faith, that if at the end of the day, my mother dedicated me to God. She's like, it's not my child, he's yours. And so she was able to pass away, bless her heart, to see the family all in a relationship with God, and so she was able to see me share my testimony. And I remember, Mom, did you see me? And I'll never forget her response. She was like, yeah, I saw. Like, she was so like, it didn't impress her at all. She's like, who told you how to tie your tie and combine your suit? You look very nice. I'm like, Mom, why is your response? She's like, because I saw that. She envisioned me being used by God in that way. She saw something that I couldn't see for myself. And so my mother was the one who sponsored me. My mother was the one who gave the final $2,000 that I needed to pay my tuition for the Bible Academy. My mother invested in me. And so often we want our kids to have a good education, find a good spouse, get a good job. My mother said, at the end of the day, if you don't have Christ, none of that stuff is meaningless. And I remember in her dying deathbed, having her final conversations with her, her telling me, Loami, it's all about faith. And at the end of the day, faith is all you have, and faith is all you need. And I'll see you at the tree of life. And that was the final words I heard from my mother. And so now when I go out and preach, people tell, oh, was it? I was like, it was a dedication and the commitment my mother made to me is why I'm here today. why, raise up a child in the way he should go. And when he gets old, he will not depart from it. And so, yeah, that's my story. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things have become new.